of the WHO Costing, Budgeting, Financing, and Delivery of COVID-19 Vaccinations Learning Series. This week's session is going to focus on the process of COVID-19 vaccination planning, costing, and budgeting in the Africa region. My name is Bruce Strominger, and I'm with Project ECHO, and we're collaborating with WHO on this learning series. And I'll be running through a few logistic items before my colleague Corinne Young at WHO welcomes you officially. Next slide. We have interpretation available today for our Spanish-speaking and French-speaking colleagues. Please take advantage of that opportunity by clicking the globe icon at the bottom right of the Zoom toolbar. You'll see French and Spanish as well as English. And if you click the mute original audio selection, it will mute the original audio and you'll just hear the interpretation. Next slide. We really look forward to your questions and comments about today's topic. Please put those in the Q&A feature, which is just to the left of the interpretation icon. And we will be monitoring those and trying to answer as many of them as we can. Also, if you have any questions about IT, logistics, or the certificate of attendance, please note that in the chat, and we will try to help you out as best we can as quickly as possible. Next slide. There is a live transcription in English option. If you click on the live transcript and the show subtitle, caption will appear on the screen, and then you can close that, click hide subtitle if you don't want to see that. Next slide. This session is being recorded, as all the sessions in this series are being recorded, and your attendance is consent to be recorded. Thank you for that. The recordings will be shared after the session, today's recordings in English, French, and Spanish, and we will share a link to a website that is archiving all the recordings and the PowerPoints and other materials. And the TechNet 21 also has a website that is archiving all these resources. A certificate of attendance will be available through the University of New Mexico, where Project ECHO is based. We'll share a link in the chat about 15 minutes before the end of the session. After you complete a brief feedback survey, you'll get an instant certificate of attendance. We really appreciate your feedback. It helps guide planning for future sessions and our quality improvements. So please take a few minutes and give us your feedback and take advantage of the certificate of attendance. Next slide. Just a quick note about data use. We take data stewardship very seriously, and we just want you all to know that all of the personally identifiable data and all the data that you share when you register, when you put questions in the Q&A, when you put things in the chat, that all of that is stewarded very carefully. What data we do share with WHO is all de-identified. Next slide. With that, it's my pleasure to hand the microphone to Corinne Young. Corinne.
Thank you, Bruce. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Corinne Young from WHO Headquarters Immunization Department. Let's start today's webinar with the announcements from the department. Next slide, please. Yeah, we have quite a lot of news this week. There are two newly published interim guidance documents. First, on the COVID-19 vaccine post-introduction evaluation. Second, on the COVID-19 immunization in refugees and migrants, principles and considerations. There are also some new trainings on administering Sinopharm and Sinovac COVID-19 vaccines, also on handling, storing, and transporting Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. In addition, we will have 4 updated materials. First, how to manage COVID-19 vaccines without vaccine file monitor at vaccination service points. Second, Sinovac COVID-19 vaccines explainer in all UN languages and Portuguese. Third, COVID-19 vaccines and breastfeeding to assist health workers and the public, including mothers who are breastfeeding or expressing milk. Finally, the digital documentation of COVID-19 certificates, vaccination status, technical specifications, and implementation guidance. Next slide, please. Today is the 6th session of this ECHO series, and this is the first regional session. We are glad to start with the African region on their progress of COVID-19 vaccination planning, costing, and budgeting. And next week at 3 p.m. Geneva time, we will have the sharing by PAHO and European region. In between of the regional sessions, we will also have the sessions on Pfizer COVID-19 vaccination planning and preparation, and the COVID-19 delivery support by Gavi and UNICEF. Then there will also be some sessions on operational microplanning, mini-CPI, and health workforce, etc. Yeah, and next slide. Okay, so for today, we will first have Dr. Amos Padu to talk on the support to COVID-19 vaccination planning, costing, financing, and rollout in African countries. Then Dr. Fries will share the experience from Cameroon on planning, budgeting, and costing NDVP tool. And finally, we'll have Dr. Alexis will conclude with the way forward and support to African countries. And after each presentation, we will have 5 minutes for Q&A to clarify the context of the presentation. And you can put your question in the Q&A feature at the bottom. And then we can discuss together. And next slide, please. For the goal of this session, we will share the experience from African region in COVID-19 vaccination planning, costing, and funding. And we anticipate that after this session, you should be able to understand the structures and functions of various institutional apparatus and supports COVID-19 vaccination in Africa. The experience of a country in the use of Civic Tool to cost out NDVP, the status and challenges of COVID-19 vaccination, planning, costing, budgeting, and in African region. And finally, some suggestions that could help course correct going forward. Next slide. Okay, so before going into the presentation, I would like to have some warm up with the pool. Can the ECHO team please help open up the pool to interact with the attendees? There are 4 questions in the pool. You will soon see a pop-up box. That will be the 4 questions that we would like to understand from you all. Yeah, okay, so you can see 4 questions. You need to roll down for the other one. So for the first one, in which WHO region do you work? Afro, Amro, Euro, PAHO, Repro, Sierra. And the second question, which organization do you represent? The government Ministry of Health for the national or subnational, or government Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Planning, or some national NGO, WHO, UNICEF, or some international organizations like World Bank, USAID, Global Fund, and other international NGO or implementing agency. Or Africa Development Bank, Africa CDC, or other. And third question, have you been involved in COVID-19 vaccine introduction, planning, costing, and rollout in Africa? And the last question, what do you consider the most prominent challenge to funding COVID-19 vaccine scaled up in Africa? You can choose planning and costing to determine the needs and availability of funding from government and partners, lack of knowledge and clarity of source of funding, approval of budget cost, or flow of funding, fund disbursement to operational level. Okay, as long as the Echo team is ready, we can show the results of the poll. Okay, so yeah, that's great. We have most of the participants from Afro. And for the organization, we can see, okay, most of them are others. It would be good to know which organization you are representing. So if possible, you can also put in the chat so that we can also understand who you are from. And for the third question, okay, I think around half of you involved in the COVID-19 vaccine introduction, planning, costing, and rollout in Africa. Okay, the fourth questions, okay. Yeah, the most challenges is unavailability of the funding. And also the second is the planning and costing. And then the third, lack of knowledge of the clarity of source of funds. So I think that for today, you may also know something about the planning and costing. And if you also need some other information, you can also reach out us, and also can go back to the previous sessions. We also have some sessions looking at the funding source and also the costing. Okay, so we end the poll. Thanks very much for all your answering the poll. And without further ado, let's start today's presentation by the Dr. Amos Patut. Amos, please.
Thank you very much, Karine. Good day, colleagues. My name is Amos Betu. I work with WHO African Region within the Intercountry Team for East and Southern Africa, supporting immunization financing sustainability. Next slide. My aim during this slot is to describe the coordination mechanism that has been put in place to support COVID-19 rollout in the African region. I will also try to explain to you some of the tools that we have deployed to support the process, and a little bit of some preliminary output that emanated from that process. Next slide. Just to remind you on this slightly busy slide that we have 46 countries in the African region, which had been structurally clustered into 3 sub-regions to facilitate operational support. To let you also note, on the left side to the top of the slide, we have the structure that supports the COVID-19 vaccine rollout. In particular, we have at the top, assuring top management, coordination, and oversight. We have the regional director for the African region, who is supported with a robust and vibrant partnership forum, as well as oversight board. Within the partnership forum, we have all interested partners working in the African region, having periodic opportunity to advise the regional director in terms of strategies and processes to deploy to support the countries. At the sub-regional level, we have coordination mechanism that supports technically the countries. What we have done at the sub-regional level is to leverage on existing platform created by Gavi and partners, which we call the regional working groups. And they have also instituted some sub-pillars looking at financing, leadership and management and coordination, looking at risk communication and infodemics, looking at monitoring and evaluation and data issues, as well as service delivery and uptake. At the country level, as you might already be aware, leveraging on global guidance that have been pushed out, we have the strengthening of structures at countries to provide both political and technical guidance in order to assure robust implementation. Thus, we see that there has been active space created and provided for platforms such as Inter-Agency Coordinating Committee, the NITADs, the scientific committees, and even in some countries, some intra and intergovernmental departmental structures were created in order to put some evidence and work around the issue of the whole of government support to vaccination in the region. Next slide. A little bit of the tools that were deployed to support the process within the African region. You will recall that globally, the vaccine readiness assessment tool was deployed. But what we have done in the African region at that time, at the inception, was to create an online platform which allows countries to input data while assessing their readiness to deploy the vaccine. You will see on your slide, on the slide, what the dashboard looks like, allowing countries to choose which of the ISTs, that is sub-regional level they belong, and allow the countries to also tick which country they belong, and that is reflected on a ready basis in the database. Next slide. Next slide, please. We also link the operational data assessment tool to a database and a dashboard that indicates the readiness by pillar area. Essentially, we are able to see the aggregate status of the entire region in terms of readiness, just as well as we're able to see the readiness of each of the countries based on the pillars of the national NDVPs that have been developed, looking at planning and coordination, looking at resources and funding, regulatory processes within the countries, service delivery, monitoring and evaluation, and not the least, looking at demand generation and communication. Next slide. An online tool was developed essentially to look at the aspects that may be far more important to us on this session, that is the financing support that supports operations. This tool was put together in order for us to be able to know what level of funding is available and deployed within country to support operations. And as a result of that, we're able to show what gaps there are in terms of operations. Next slide. The outcome of that process is to be able to show what gaps there are, as I mentioned earlier. And here we are able to look at other components of the NDVP and also track what is going on within countries. For example, there could have been issues that had emanated since the implementation of the NDVP, since the rollout of the vaccination, in which case the interaction review will enable countries to be able to isolate such actions or such issues and then feed that back into the updated NDVP. We are able to also track how many countries are able to update their NDVP, the status of development of microplans, a very important component of vaccine rollout, just as we are able to look at other components and other issues that are important. And this is aggregated either at sub-regional level, as I mentioned earlier on, or put together to be able to look at the complete picture for the entire 46 countries in the African region. Next slide. Next slide, please. You will also recall that globally the Civic Tool was developed and deployed in the countries. We have been able to socialize as much as feasible through webinars and through other contact with countries for them to prioritize the use of this tool to cost the NDVP. You will notice from the slide that virtually all the countries in the sub-region had one interaction or the other with the tool, at least if we go by the number of countries that had downloaded the tool. We must report here that not all countries had utilized the tool. However, technical assistance continues to be provided for countries that may want to use the tool. We're also trying to encourage countries to be able to use the output of the tool for policy engagement, especially when it comes to mobilization of resources, dialoguing with various government departments to ensure that the aspect of government that talks to whole of government in support of vaccination, whole of government in support of stopping the pandemic is brought to the table at any point in time when the cost and the investment requirement is being discussed. Next slide. One funding mechanism that seems to be fairly available for countries, most countries that are Gavi eligible, is the CDS support to operational fund. Support has been provided to countries to be able to develop their applications, and where necessary, adequate follow-up has been made. What we have done in support of that is to create a dashboard to be able to track the process, to be able to see where additional focus will be needed on a country-by-country basis in order to assure that we do not have a situation where partners are willing to provide resources, but countries are slow to access such resources. We are also putting together, next slide please, opportunity for us to be able to track other funding envelopes that may be available, for example, from the World Bank, next slide, and also from organizations like the Global Fund. This will be put together in a database that will be able to track and leverage on what we have from the Global Partners Platform in terms of funding available, gaps that are available, and this will trigger support from our end, as well as partners to be able to mobilize resources to fill the gap. Next slide. The essence of support to the planning process, as well as essence of support to tools and deployment of tools, is to ensure that a robust deployment of vaccine is made, that we do not have a situation where vaccines are available in the countries, yet they are not getting to people at need. Therefore, I can report to you as interim output that as at September the 4th of this month, out of the over 91 million doses of vaccines that had been received, 52.6 million had been administered. We continue to monitor the progress of vaccination and a review mechanism put in place such that planning and funding is assured to facilitate uptake of vaccine deployment. I must also say that this is an online tool whereby as more data is being inputted within the countries, we are able to track in real time what the situation is. I think this is the last slide from my side. I would like to take questions and ask you for comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amos. It's a great presentation to know how AFRO is supporting countries on this pandemic. And so any questions to Amos? So you can put in the Q&A features at the bottom of the Zoom toolbar. So now we don't have question yet. So okay, great. So one question here is, Is the implementation of SAGE prioritization roadmap working in Africa?
If I may just respond to that question, I think we can have more granularity around the question from other colleagues. But to say that initially the design was for countries to follow the prioritization roadmap, but the way the vaccines were deployed and available in countries may have encouraged countries to adjust their implementation strategy to follow availability of vaccine in such a way that it may not have been a mathematical adherence to the initial prioritization roadmap. For example, we ran into a situation whereby because vaccines were going to expire because of short shelf life, countries had to quickly ramp up the implementation and application of those vaccines. That may not have enabled them to intricately follow the SAGE mechanism, prioritization roadmap, but we are trying to redirect that within the updated NDVP and hope that this will happen. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have the next question. To what extent is WHO coordinating beyond development partners, but inclusive of government's own efforts to acquire vaccines?
Within each country, the coordination mechanisms that had been put in place, usually led by government and bringing all partners on board, is to assure that there is synchronization in terms of what goes on with each government within each country. I believe that is one platform whereby if countries wish to acquire vaccines other than the various mechanisms like COVAX and the African vaccine acquisition mechanism that had been offered to them, such will be discussed, and there will be, to the knowledge of all partners supporting the process. I mentioned earlier on that at the regional level, we have the Partners Forum, where all such issues are discussed, and in a synchronized manner, this is fed into decision processes within the region. Thank you.
Thank you. So if you have more questions, please feel free to put in the Q&A. And I have a question to you, Amo. Obviously supporting a lot of the countries, and I think some of the countries are still like updating the NDVP or their costing. So if they would like to seek support, how they should do so? How they can seek support on costing or the NDVP?
Thank you very much. I am sure Alexi will dwell more on that in terms of way forward, but it is important for countries to know that we have put in place some consultants that can be deployed to rapidly support costing processes. And we also leverage on the global mechanisms, the CVIC global team that had been working, putting the tool together and having a pool of consultants, a pool of partners with experience across regions, not just in the African region alone, that could support the process. Otherwise, I believe when Alexi talks about way forward, he will also come back to support available to countries in terms of costing the NDVPs. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, before going to the next question, I see Alice's hands up. Do you want to supplement? So Alice, yeah.
No, yes, I don't have a question for Amos. We are working together. Okay, what I want just to add after the point raised by Karen, during the process of elaborating the NDVP1 in December from January, I think the country worked more vaccine delivery only. And the issue regarding operational funding was not taken in consideration. At this time, we had the information, the grant from World Bank and the platform COVAX. There is no some clear about how to fund some component like waste management, transportation of vaccines, vaccinator on the field, communication, the operation. And when come the step of deploying the vaccine on the field, many countries faced difficulties regarding the operational funding. And I think now that it's a critical issue that we face. And there is no way for the country to make the costing and know how much it will cost the new NDVP and how to mobilize funding to address. So I think we are on the best way to make the country be aware that it is very important for them to do the cost and how to address the gap if the gap is a very big issue. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, Amos. And we have the third question. Not sure, maybe Amos also would like to address in live, or you would prefer typing? Because we, yeah, this is on the CDS funding. So yeah, because of time, maybe we can just go ahead with the presentations, and we have time, we can also put the question in live later. So maybe next slide, please. And my pleasure to hand over the microphone to Dr. Fries van Hoek to share the experience from Cameroon on planning, budgeting, costing of NDVP tool. Fries, please.
Thank you, Karin. Hello to all. I am Fritz Fonquer, finance assistant at the WHO Cameroon. I'll be going through rapidly sharing the experience of lessons learned COVID budgeting process in Cameroon. Slide. Slide, please. And we'll just have 3 main points on the plan, which is a brief description of the process, the results and the use of the results, and finally challenges faced during the process. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. In Cameroon, at the beginning of the year 2021, there was a lot of meeting sessions which took place in order to cost COVID activities, planned for campaigns which were projected in the second, third, and fourth trimesters. And this started without the COVID tool, actually. There were sessions where the team sat with the EPI team and the ministry officials, and they had these discussions. But the COVID tool coming into place was timely because the discussions which were ongoing couldn't help to review certain aspects. I would take, for example, the budgeting templates which were being used were mostly based on experiences from previous polio or measles rubella campaigns. That was the structure of the different templates which were used, and these templates had weaknesses in certain aspects. They couldn't properly help review COVID immunization financing options, and couldn't help to have a holistic view of different sources of funding. I couldn't address issues linked to equity in coverage, and there was also challenges in harmonizing the various components of immunization financing costs. That notwithstanding, once the tool was available, we were able to use the tool alongside assistance which was gotten from various colleagues. We're thanking Alexis on that, where the tool generated a total cost of 144 million, but the tool was actually very detailed, and one strong point of the tool was the fact that it could pre-populate several aspects of immunization line items. The pre-population tool helps to gain a lot of time, and the possibility that the pre-populated data could be overwritten was equally very helpful once you just need to know what you're playing with, and you can generate or you can input whatever data you think is most pertinent. Okay, so about this tool, in terms of results and the use of these results, while going on with the budgeting, the costing, and drafting the NDPV plan, there was also we're actively engaged in planning for vaccination campaigns or other operational activities which were dependent on the output of the tool. The tool was not yet complete, but other operational activities were equally being planned based on the output gotten from the tool. And in that line, vaccination campaigns were programmed, mini campaigns were programmed, preparation of communication activities. All those were a subset of what the tool generated. The tool was used as a guide, a ceiling, and there were other micro budgets which were detailed based on the extract that you have displayed before you. Now, in terms of weaknesses, challenges faced with the tool, there are lots of challenges. Slide, please, Karen. Okay, I'll continue while the slide changes. In terms of challenges, we would say that the tool was quite complex for a beginning, and some versions of some extra versions couldn't properly display the results. I think at some point that was handled with an update in the version. And as I said earlier, operational activities were ongoing concurrently while the budgeting exercise was on. That is simply because there was this pressure to go on with operational activities considering the expiring dates of some vaccines which were already available at the level of the country. Actual target population, finally, when these activities were being implemented, wasn't always aligned with the projected target population. At some point, it was estimated that we just had to go with all those who are 18 years older. There was a major weakness, which was the absence of micro-planning at the level of the districts. So costing budgeting was done at the central level, and there was lots of assumptions that were being made. I understand the limited time frame didn't really play much in our favor. Also, there was quite challenging understanding the impact of the various choices that were being made when filling the tool. We had to, at every point, we key in data, you try to see what is generated, analyze it, and see if it's pertinent. And we had this back and forth, seeing the results that were being displayed and changing the various variables. It was equally challenging to allocate vaccines according to different modalities, because in the course of the costing exercise, the country went beyond the ambit of the COVAX facility and started acquiring vaccines through other modalities, bilateral accords and so forth. It was equally challenging, mandating activities and mapping contributions with various partners. There was at some point during the costing exercise, the country tried to put partners together so they could fine-tune the resource mapping aspect of the tool. Of course, the meeting was quite productive, but things didn't really go as planned, with the partners really aligning themselves with aligning their mandate with what was expected or what was generated from the tool. Setting targets too was quite difficult, and that could even be seen through the various campaigns which are ongoing. The targets weren't always aligned with the projection of the Civic Tool. And finally, it was difficult to get every stakeholder, some stakeholders on board. Some stakeholders found it arduous going through the Civic Tool and found this tool to be quite intimidating. But it was kind of difficult not to consider this tool for various stakeholders, because at the moment, I think the tool was the only template available which could address all the various components of immunization, and was quite addresses issues relating to equity. However, I would say that in the course of the exercise, while other activities were going on, we didn't really take into consideration, or I should say that it was quite difficult for us to identify gaps and prioritize action based on identifying gaps and prioritizing action based on the evidence or the information we had. And it was also not very easy for us identifying opportunities for financial support. As I said, it was difficult to get it was challenging to get all partners to come on board, detailing their actions with regards to the output that was generated from the tool. Finally, it was not very easy for the team that work on the tool to grasp the different costing methods offered by the tool, whether it's bottom up, a capital, or based on target population. And it was also challenging considering the limited time they had to work on this tool, having evidence-based information to generate or to input the line items that were required in order to have a tool that was properly fit. On that note, I'll hand over the mic to you. Thanks for following. Over. Hello. Thank you, Karim. Am I still on?
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, great. Yeah. Thanks so much, I think it would be great. Thanks so much for sharing the experience from Cameroon, and we can see all the challenges. But also good to hear that you also find the Civic Tool useful, that with some pre-populated data that may also be helpful to start the planning and costing. And can anyone see, if anyone have any questions, can also put in a Q&A so that we can answer. So if possible, and Amos, not sure if you can see the Q&A. I have some difficulty with Zoom for now. Maybe if colleagues, Amos can see the Q&A, can also help with answering the question.
Currently, there are no questions on the Q&A platform. So we encourage that participants continue to put questions on the Q&A session and on the chat, while we move on to the next presentation by Alexi, who will tell us way forward and support that is available to countries in the African region. Alexi, please go ahead.
Okay. As the presentation is in English, I will do that in French. If we
Please go ahead. There is interpretation available.
Please. Alors, sur la base de tout ce qu'on a
So based on
de
you've
Amos
learned
et de Fritz Fonque,
with Amos and Fitz way on the challenges that we have seen, as you've been able to find out, Cameroon, lots of issues have shown up with the use they have of the tools. They got a clear idea of the financing available. We have been able to spot 5 points which we can consider as perspective in terms of planning, costing, budgeting, and financing. Number one, we encourage all countries to conduct an IAR, the review, interaction, in the next days, so that we can determine the limitations and weaknesses of the NDVP1, which was done at the time without taking into consideration the budgeting aspect and operational costs and its impact on the limitation of the deployment and implementation. So we encourage countries to conduct that IIR in the next days, and we are ready to support them in this. Number two, we are considering to help the countries in the updating of the NVPs, elaborating the new development planning of the vaccine based on the new WHO guidelines, which were published in March last. Number 3, we will support the costing of the NDVP2 for vaccinations using Civic Tool, which will allow us to evaluate the cost and analyze the financing and determine dates. Number 4, we are going to support resources, mobilization efforts in the countries as far as the national and all other areas and donors such as World Bank, the African Development Bank, Gavi via CDS, Global Funds, and other regional organizations. For instance, in West Africa, we've noticed that OAS was financing certain countries. Number 5, we are going to continue to monitor the utilization of mobilized resources through the resource tracking tool to understand what positive impact it has on the use and development of the implementation of the vaccine on the field. Back to you.
Karen, back to you.
Yes.
Thank you. So any question to Alexis? And you can put in the Q&A features at the bottom of your Zoom bar. And we can see, and Alexis also mentioned you will, the regional office will continue supporting countries on the NDPP, on costing, and also the resource mobilizations. And yes, and we have questions from the floor. And maybe Alexis, can you please answer? Because I don't know French. That would be great if you can also speak out the question and answer, please.
The question is on the platform or it
La
has
question sur la plateforme.
At the bottom. Just next to the participants icon.
Oui, oui, je vois, oui.
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay.
Got it.
Alors,
all right, so
la question envoyée par Alice.
The question comes from Alice, and in fact, we are not doing a monitoring by a vaccinated child. What we are following is the resources received by the countries, how those are used, what type of item. For instance, in the dashboard that was given by Amos, we have operating cost. We have a definition of operating cost, but we would have to have all the financing and vaccines included to go to a stage which would allow us to have a cost of a fully vaccinated child. I'm saying child, but it has to be a person completely vaccinated. We are monitoring this to see how many resources were received and how was it used, communication, transportation, payment for vaccinators. I don't know if this answers the question.
Thank you, Alexis. And I think we have another questions. How does WHO ensure vaccine equity in its planning and budgeting process? I'm not sure whether Alexis would like to answer or other
Alors,
colleagues.
cette question, elle est globale.
This question is more global, more world wide. You know that the anti-COVID vaccines that are sent to the countries, first on the COVAX platform, we had identified 20% of the population with a specific category, elderly people, first line employees, other persons with comorbidities. But as the pandemic was evolving, we found out there was a will to go beyond 20%. That's why the Assembly of the WHO asked to go further than the initial targets. So in the countries, the plan of development is not categories, but also goes to rural areas as well as urban areas for anybody who is eligible to be vaccinated. I was in Guinea-Bissau. We vaccinated military. We had micro plans in the districts to go into these districts and vaccinate any person who was eligible for the available vaccine, because certain vaccines do not take less than 18 years of age. It depends on which vaccines we have, but these vaccines are now for any person who fills the condition. So the equity question doesn't is not valid because there's no discrimination among people.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether other colleague would like to add on this question.
Monsieur va-t-il écouter? Explain. Cette question, c'est celle-là à laquelle on a répondu tout à l'heure.
Well, this question is the one we answered to. How does the WHO ensure vaccine equity in the planning and budgeting process? That's what we do. We have a national plan which takes into consideration all eligible population for vaccination without looking at origin, etc., etc.
Yeah, we also see another question. We will follow up. When reaching for equity, which group has been harder to address? Women, people with disability, people in rural communities, etc. Absolutely hard to reach. So
À cette question, je vais répondre peut-être, d'autres peuvent me compléter, Marina.
Well, I'm going to start. Maybe Amos Marina could complement my response. In the NDVP 1, initially, we had specific categories of individual healthcare workers, elderly people over 65 years of age, people who had comorbidities. So when we look at this, the experience that I have seen, we have more vaccinations than in the capitals. We haven't had vaccines in rural areas. Then we realized that since there's an exchange between urban and rural area, not vaccinating people in rural area was a high risk for the country. This is why we started to ask the head of district to have a micro plan for their district to take into consideration target populations in the countryside. So initially, we could say that rural populations were somehow forgotten in the NDVP1. It's not that way in every country, because we've seen in Ivory Coast, when they started to vaccinate in the countryside, there was a high increase in demand of vaccine, to the point that it went to Niger or other countries to compensate for this deficit. But globally, the question for the information of the request of vaccine remains a problem. Some people have had the first AstraZeneca doses and then refused to take the second one. I've seen it in Guinea-Bissau, for instance, where we have 14% only of the healthcare workers who wait for their second doses. That's one of the other issues that need to be addressed in the budgeting. I don't know if Amos has anything to add to this.
Nothing to add from my side. Thank you.
I think that what I have nothing to add. Over to you.
Thank you. And I also see some colleague posts about the interaction review. Yes, there's some tools provided by the WHO for the countries. So, and we can also share the link later in the chat for the IAR. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah, and I think before this session, you all may fill in the registration form, and then you already post some questions that you think are very urgent questions that about COVID-19 vaccine costing and financing. And we had a look at it, and I think some of them also already answered by today's session, and some of them, in fact, already answered by the previous sessions. Like about the Civic Tool or how to cost out the COVID-19 vaccines. So we highly encourage that you all may also go back to the recording, because we have the actually one ECHO team already have a very good records of all the previous session, so that you can also look up the previous session and your question will also be answered. Any other questions to Alexis or other presenters? Okay, if no more questions, then maybe we can have the feedback pool and see if ECHO team can also put up the feedback pool. Yeah. And you can see two questions here. The first one, has the session improved your knowledge of COVID-19 vaccine planning, costing, and rollout in Africa? Yes or no? And second question, is the experience applicable to your area of support to COVID-19 vaccination? And also yes or no? And we will wait for your answer, give a few seconds. And when ECHO team is ready, then we can also put up the result. Okay, great. So we all have over 90% for the two questions, and good that we achieved what we would like to let you know in this session, and then you can also have better understanding of in this area. Okay, so maybe we can go to the next slide, and this is for the closing of the meeting. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so here is the slide providing you the webinar materials, including a recording and slides that I mentioned. So if you have would like to look up this recording or the previous sessions, you can also look up in the link here. And if you have further questions after the session, you can also ask in the TechNet21 forum and Telegram. And thanks very much, TechNet team, for the supporting. And next slide, please. And you will find the recordings of this session in English, French, and Spanish. And for next week at 3 p.m. Geneva time, we will have a session on the regional approach to support COVID-19 vaccination costing budgeting in American and European countries. And this the session will be in English, French, Spanish, and Russian. And you can also see the link here to do the registration. Next slide, please. Okay, thanks very much again for your participation, and we look forward to see you again in the future sessions. And thanks for the translator doing the excellent interpretation, and Echo team presenters and all colleagues supporting the sessions. And any questions related to the session topic will not answer. So you can also put up the questions in the chat and Q&A or in the TechNet Telegram. And then we will also answer you later through email. Okay, thanks everyone.